Introduce our speaker. Our program this evening is entitled A Love Affair with Hummingbirds. Conservation biologist Karen Krebs worked at the Arizona Sonoran Desert Museum for more than 26 years and has extensive knowledge of birds, mammals, deserts, and animal adaptations and behavior. Her passion for hummingbirds has resulted in a book chapters, scientific papers, and also a husbandry manual for captive hummingbirds for the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. She is writing a second book, and actually she told me tonight she has a third book on hummingbirds. I don't know if her third book is on hummingbirds. Her experiences with these flying jewels. Her research on hummingbirds includes migration, nesting biology, behavior, song development, and longevity. Karen regularly advises zoological institutions and aviaries on proper care and husbandry of captive hummingbirds. She has conducted educational workshops and seminars on birds for various organizations, schools, and yearly bird festivals. Karen has also studied bats for more than 30 years. She has led and co-led natural history trips in, get this, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Mexico, Baja, Costa Rica, Ecuador, Galapagos, and Africa. Karen has a Bachelor of Science degree in Wildlife and Fisheries Science from the University of Arizona and has lived in Arizona for more than 50 years. So if you would please help me welcome Karen Krebs.
This is, Well, it's a thrill to be here. It's been so hot in Tucson, and I was looking forward to coming up here for some cool weather. It's a little bit warmer than I wish, but it's definitely cooler than Tucson, so I'm happy to be here. I'm going to give you kind of an overview of hummingbirds, a lot of stories, things I've seen. Actually, the 3 books I just got done, well, I've written actually 4 books. One was about hummingbirds, and then the last 3 are, it's Desert Life and a Desert Life activity book, and then Hikes and Walks of Tucson, which you probably don't care about. But anyway, if you go to Amazon.com and just put in my name, they'll pop up. I'm working on another book about my experiences at the Desert Museum, and then one of them, another book about hummingbirds, a second book about hummingbirds. So watch for those. Those will be a couple years. If we can have the lights down just a little bit, that would be good for me. Give you a little bit of natural history, classification. Of course, there are aves, which is all birds, and then apodiforms. And Trochilidae is actually the family the hummingbirds are in. They're New World species just because of their size. You won't find them in Europe. They can't go across large bodies of water, although they do go across the Gulf of Mexico, especially ruby throats when they're migrating. And they're mostly tropical. As you go south, the species diversity increases. And why would that be? Yeah, I mean, mild winters, and there's more food there to eat. They don't have to deal with the cold winters. Although, do you guys have hummingbirds in the winter? Okay, good, good. And right now at my house, I've got 8 feeders out, and I've got 5 species. So we've got birds. I've got Annas and black-chin, broadbill, rufus. I have a broadtail, and they're just moving through. And the Annas and Costas, and Acosta too. Costas can stay. Annas will stay. Black-chins, rufus, they'll go on through, and the broadtail too. New World species, about 338 species. In Arizona, when I used to give these talks, I used to always say that there were 17 species, and then Sherry Williamson in southeastern Arizona actually captured a ruby throat. And so we added ruby throat, and that's the species that you usually find east of the Mississippi that everyone's so familiar with. But they have come to Arizona too, so I bumped it up to 18 species. U.S., Canada, 26 species. Mexico. So you see how the diversity increases as you go south, 51 in Mexico. Ecuador. Any of you been to Ecuador? Yeah, it was like heaven to me. It was just, I just couldn't believe all the species. It was so exciting. I was actually there on a museum trip, and we were taking a group from the museum to the Galapagos, but we spent a few days in Ecuador too, in Quito, and we also went up to the forest areas. It was just heaven for me. Bee hummingbird would be your smallest, about 2 grams, and giant hummingbird, 20 grams, so 10 times as big. But we've got a hummingbird right here in the U.S. that's not a whole lot bigger than that bee hummingbird. Anyone know what that is? Calliope, yeah, it's about 2.3 grams, so he's not a whole lot bigger. Nectivorous and insectivorous, of course, they're getting the nectar from the flowers, but they do also eat a lot of insects, too, and you'll see them hawking out to get the insects. You'll see them open that bill and grab it, with the tongue, and so they're getting, the quick energy from the nectar, the sugar, and then they're getting their protein and fat and vitamins and all that from the insects. Anyone see the hummingbird in here? I like this slide because it's a comparison to humans and an ostrich and a king penguin. Well, there's the hummingbird right there sitting on a rock, which you probably wouldn't see a hummingbird sitting on a rock, but anyway, there he is. Identification basics. If you most of you here, I would think are birders, and if you're just starting with your hummingbird, start with the males. It's going to be the males that have that beautiful iridescence, and they're either going to have some kind of color on the crown or the gorget, or they might have a mustache, some feathers that go down the side. So start out with your males and get real comfortable with them, and then as soon as you do that, then you can jump over to the females. So gorget and crown colors are real important with those guys. There's also sexual dimorphism, which means that the males and females, most of the males and females are very, very different. The males are usually very showy, very bright, and females are not, at least in the temperate. When you get down to the tropics, they're more alike down in the tropics. Now, why up in the U.S. or North America, which also includes Mexico, would there be sexual dimorphism, whereas you get down the tropics, it's not so much so? Yeah, and once you go down to the tropics, you go south, you're going to get into a lot more forest, and there's a lot more foliage. And our species do a lot of diving. Now, if you're down south, hummingbirds also leck. And lecking means that the males will sit somewhere like on a branch, and they'll advertise to the females, and the females pick, the one that they're interested in. So lecking, hummingbirds do lecking. They also do the fantastic dives, like the black chins will do a dive. The calliope will go as high as maybe 100 feet up in the air and come down. Black chins, theirs are a little bit more shallow. Annas. A male hummingbird's either going to have a song or a wing buzz, and they use that to attract the females, and they also use that to defend territories too. So if you think of your hummingbirds like Annas and the Costas, they're going to have songs, whereas a black chin doesn't have a song, but he has a wing buzz. So that male's going to have that song or that wing buzz to attract those females and also defend the territory too. A lot of you probably bird by, I do a lot of birding by ear, and each species of hummingbird is very, very different. So when I'm out hiking or walking or birding and I hear diving, I can pretty much tell what species it is by the dive or by the song they're making or the wing buzz. Like if you're up in the mountains and you see maybe a magnificent or a blue throat, it's kind of a dull, buzzy sound. If it's a broadtail, it's a shrill kind of whistle-like. and then the coast it kind of sounds like a ricocheting bullet. So if you know your birds well enough and you watch them and you get out there, you'll be real familiar with these. Also, think about your seasons of the year. Think about what you have in the winter as compared to what you have in the summer, and that will help you identify them too. And, at my house in Tucson, Arizona, and the southwest side of town, the rufous isn't going to hang around. The broadtail's not going to hang around. Sometimes the broadbills will hang around in the winter, but I will definitely have Annas and Costas and then sometimes a broadbill. Now, one year, about 5 years ago, when it got very, very cold, and I had a violet crown, and violet crowns are starting to show up in Tucson more, which is exciting because they're fairly common in southern Arizona, especially down at the Pattons at Patagonia. They have a lot of violet crowns, and the caretaker down there said I think it was the end of January that they just all disappeared because it was so cold down there, the feeders were freezing. And that's when the birds showed up at my house and stayed at my house for 2 months. And then once it got warmer, went back. So it's interesting that violet crown, he didn't go south, or she, it came north up into Tucson from Patagonia, which is pretty interesting. So hummingbirds are doing different things. I've seen over the years different movements and different changes with the bird. When I was working at the Desert Museum, we had a migratory pollinator program, and what we did was we did a lot of trips down to Mexico, and even we collaborated with some of the Mexican researchers down in Mexico, and then also some of the researchers up in Canada. And there was a lot of banding going on, and we were trying to predict every year that we were working on this program where the rufous were going to show up in Mexico. And from one year to the next, it was very, very different. And how do those birds know where to go? Maybe one year there was some food there, a lot of, natural food and flowers. The next year there wasn't, and they weren't there. So, they've got to have backup plans. They just can't, say, well, this is where we're going to go. They've got to have those backup plans, and that's pretty cool when you think about it, and that's, the way they survive. Oh, let me. Okay, so what up the bird in, I have a pointer here. What's this bird here? Yeah, buff-bellied. What about this bird? This is Costas here. This is the real, Annas. This is the real common one here, and he's real big. He's bigger than the Costas. This is broadbill, real good. Black chin or bully. The rufous. I tell everybody if humans were hummingbirds, they'd all be in prison, especially if they were rufous. And then here's the violet crown here. So you have a couple of Mexican species here. You have the violet crown, and the broadbill is also a Mexican species, and buff-bellied is too. But because we live in Arizona, especially in southern Arizona, they will come across the border, and it's real exciting. I do a lot of volunteer work for the Tucson Audubon, and I did, because this was the year of the hummingbird for the Tucson Audubon, I took a group once a month for 5 months, starting, I guess, in March, took a group to go see hummingbirds, and we go to these different places. And I was telling them that years ago, I used to go to anyone been to Tom Beatty's place in the Huachucas? Yeah. I love Tom. I go there all the time, and he can be real cantankerous and grouchy and everything, but for some reason he likes me to bring the groups. I was sitting there with a group, and I didn't always take my camera with me because I felt guilty if I did that, because I just wanted to take pictures all the time and not talk to the group or talk about, how to identify these birds. And all of a sudden this bird shows up, and it was the cinnamon hummingbird. And Tom could not claim it unless there was a picture. And there were 2 people on the trip, and they did take pictures with their camera. I looked at it, and I'm 99% sure because I've seen them in Mexico. And I told them how important it was that they needed to send me a picture so that I could send it to Tom, or send one to Tom so that he could document it and get credit for it. And they never did. And the Desert Museum wouldn't let me bug these people. I sent them an email, wrote them a letter, and they just weren't birders, and they didn't realize how important it was. So every time I go see Tom, he reminds me about that. And that's been about 10 years ago. But it was a cinnamon hummingbird. So you never, ever know what's going to show up in southeastern Arizona just because, we're close to the border. Annas. So this is a good example of the iridescence. And so iridescence depends on the angle at which you're looking at the bird. So the bird, and the light has to be lined exactly for you to get that. And when I worked at the Desert Museum, I actually oversaw the hummingbird exhibit out there for more than 15 years. And we would get people from the east that would say, well, your hummingbirds out here are not as colorful as ours. Well, they usually have one species, the ruby throat, and then we have all these species out here. But I would just tell them, you need to sit and watch. And if you're not lined up exactly, this is exactly the same species as this bird here. This is what you'll get. So the angle at which you're looking at these birds is real important. And when I first started taking pictures of hummingbirds, I look at, they were slides then, and I ended up taking 100, pictures because they're slides. We do digital now. But what I took then and what I took now is just totally different. So practice makes perfect. So if you're a photographer or you're just starting to take pictures of hummingbirds, just, keep on practicing, and you will get better, I promise you. Don't panic if it's a female, and if you get your males down, that's good, and the females would just come in time. And a lot of times I identify females by their sound and size, too. So this is, remember I was saying the Annas was a little bit bigger. This is a typical female Annas. They're kind of dusty, dirty, speckly, and sometimes they have those little feathers sticking up on the head. The bill's not as long as like a black chin. And they're bigger than the black chin. So if you've got if you got an Annas, it's going to be bigger than a broadtail. It's going to be bigger than the Costas, or definitely bigger than a calliope. So look at your size, too. What about this bird? What would you guess this bird? Just kind of green, gray, and white. How about a black chin? The black chin and the female Costas are very, very similar, kind of green, gray, and white, but the sounds they make are very, very different. This could be a black chin or a Costas. This is definitely a Costas here. And call. Okay, a few more females for you. What's this little girl here? Short bill, a little speckling. She's smaller than the other birds. How about the calliope? Yeah, so that would be your calliope. This could be a rufous or a broadtail. They're real similar. They do have speckling on the throat and some rust on the side here. This bird right here is a female black chin. Look at that long bill, kind of green, gray, and white. Okay, now what about this bird here? She's got a little bit of white behind the eye. Broadbill. Good, female broadbill. It's called a broadbill because the bill is kind of broad right there at the base, and the female will have a little bit of orange underneath that bill. What about this lady here? This is a D-curved bill. Lucifer, very good. Very, very good. Just a few more females. I got to stay away from the microphone there. Okay, iridescence. Depending on the angle at which you're looking at the birds, it's very similar to soap bubbles, oil slick, and it has to do with reflection and refraction. Reflection is the light goes out and comes back, and refraction is it's a change. It goes out and kind of changes. So hummingbirds, they don't all have iridescence. I mean, most of the iridescence is right here on, this is a Costas here, and you can see a mustache. So you see how packed these feathers are, too. And they have some on the crown here. Look at the rufous. If you turn just like the Annas that I showed you, you wouldn't be able to really see that orange. Rufous, I've got 2 rufous at my house right now, and even though I've got 8 feeders, they try to defend all 8 feeders. And it's just like, there's enough food out here for all of you. You don't have to. And I mean, they're just chasing everybody, taking turns chasing everyone. Okay, I could do a whole lecture on iridescence, platelets, barbules, air bubbles, tightly packed feathers. Anyone ever seen an albino or a partial albino? Yeah, it's pretty cool. I used to go down to Rockport every year, and I did this for about 15 years. The Chamber of Commerce would hire me to come down and do a series of hummingbird talks. And they have a hummingbird festival down there, and it's right outside of Corpus Christi. And they always had an albino that just showed up every single year to someone's yard. And this one, I was actually working at the museum, and I got a call from a woman in Green Valley, and she goes, I have a white hummingbird. I went, oh, can I come down? She said, yeah. Well, you can see it's not a total albino. I mean, it's got a little brown here. It's got dark eyes. How would I know? She had about 3 or 4 feeders. And how would I know without actually handling this bird what species it was? It was in the summer. Wing sound, calls. Females make calls too. We even had a female on a hummingbird exhibit that sang. I mean, most females don't sing, but she sang. Lone blackbill is actually a female black chin, and there were Annas there were Costas there were male black chins, and they were kind of pushing her around, but she was kicking butt. I mean, she was holding her own. And unfortunately, they tend to have a tough time because the other birds do pick on them. And I was just totally amazed that the albino showed up in Rockport every year, because this bird never showed up again in Green Valley. Now, maybe it ended up somewhere else, I don't know, but it's pretty unusual to have this. Okay, flight. Hummingbirds are like little miniature helicopters, and as you can see with this male broadbill right here, he's sitting on the branch, but before he even takes off, he starts rotating those wings, and so when he lets go, he's gone, just like that. So the wings beat 80 times a second. If they're doing their dives, it's like 200 times. I mean, you can't even imagine that. I mean, it's just fantastic. But, to go backward, they just kind of tilt backward, little mini helicopter. And they don't, most birds have several movable joints in the arm, and hummingbirds don't. It rotates at the shoulder, so they have that special flight. But they can hover for prolonged periods. They can fly backwards, upside down. And it's just, I was in Mexico one time, and I was watching this gray hawk that was just sitting up on a perch on a tree. And here comes this broadbill, and comes up, and he's going, right in front of him. And the gray hawk's like, I don't even see you, I don't even want to acknowledge you. And they're so cocky because they're so fast. And that gray hawk, had he wanted to catch that broadbill, he wouldn't have, because that broadbill would have been gone. So they're very, very fast flyers, very adept to all different types of, for instance, this broadbill here, coming in to feed into the corolla, here he is. If he has to leave, he can just flip over and be gone. I mean, other birds are not able to do that. It's pretty cool. Anyone know what this bird is right here? Calliope, you got it. This is fairy duster. Hovering takes a lot of energy, and those wings are beating like 80 times a second. So these guys are feeding about every 7 to 10, 12 minutes they feed. What do they do at night when they have to, go to sleep and slow down? What do they do? Yeah, torpor. And Bill Calder, when he was alive, used to do some work on broadtails up in Colorado, and what he found out in some of his research was that some birds that had gotten plenty of food, maybe fed at 1,000 flowers, 8 to 10 calories, what they require, they don't always go into torpor at night. If they've got enough energy and they've got enough fat, they can utilize that. But if they don't, they can go into torpor, and that just saves them through the night. But what he found out was that they would go into torpor at night, even fat hummingbirds, and so they wouldn't have to use that fat, and they could just, migrate further and faster. which is pretty smart when you stop and think about it. When I was banding with Steve and Ruth Russell, and I did some banding with them for like 15 years in Sonoyta and Nogales, we would go and the same. I used to do the nets and handle the birds, and Ruth would band, and Steve would take data. And almost to the exact day, we would get the exact same birds a year later. So they were coming back to the same places. But I remember that there was this one black-chin, and this guy weighed over 4 grams, which is really heavy for a black-chin. And when, once they're banded, then I would feed them, some sugar water. And when he took off, he's like, maybe 2 or 3 feet off the ground. I thought, boy, you're going to have to lose some weight to do that migrating. So he had put on a lot of, weight with, and they become little maniacs, at your feeders, especially during migration. I mean, right now there's so many hummingbirds at my house, but they need that fat. With our birds in Arizona, a calliope would have about a 1/2 inch long bill. There's a hummingbird that comes up from Mexico, and sometimes it shows up in Madera Canyon along the southeast Arizona that has a bill that's 1.5 inches. Anyone can think of what that bird is? Yep. Actually, I saw my first plain-cap star-throat I saw in Costa Rica, but I have seen the one in Madera Canyon. So the bills of most of the hummingbirds are in between that. I mean, those are the two far, ends, the calliope and the plain-cap star-throat. Hummingbirds have what's called a hyoid apparatus, and you can see the tongue here. It's kind of fringed on the end, and it's kind of a spring mechanism that wraps around behind the eye. And it comes out, and, they lap up the nectar or they just catch insects, with that tongue. There's another bird that has the same type of setup and bugs the heck out of hummingbird feeders. Can anyone think of what that bird would be? Woodpecker, you got it. Same type of setup there. You can see this is a broad tail right here, and you can see usually after they feed, they'll take their tongue and they'll rub it on, maybe a leaf or something like we would use a napkin for our mouth. Raptors have binocular vision. Hummingbirds do too, and they have 2 types of phobia, and that's the indentations on the retina. And they have one for pursuit, and one for pursuit would be, of course, chasing insects that you never see, and another would be for locating food. So they have very, very good eyesight. Ratio of heart size to body size, look at that. Largest for any warm-blooded animal. I mean, because those wings beat so fast, their body temperature can be anywhere from 104 to 107 degrees. And if we had a body temperature of that, we would die. I mean, we would totally burn. Sometimes they think I'm burning up in Tucson, but, that's a very high body temperature for those guys. And when they do go into torpor, they just, shut everything down, the breathing, the heart rate, the body temperature, everything. So it is kind of like a type of hibernation that they're actually in. And I know that when we did have some really cold days at the Desert Museum, I'd go into the hummingbird exhibit and see if there were some of the birds. If they haven't gotten enough food at night, then they do have trouble waking up. I would have to carefully take them, and they're real hard to find because they'll hide in the vegetation, usually right up against a leaf, and you just don't see them. And I have to break off the branch, take them inside, and put them in our incubator and warm them up. And if they weren't awake, fairly quick like the other birds, they were having problems. And I wonder how many birds in the wild just don't make it. They do have feet, but they're not running around like curve-bill thrashers or gamble quail or something, but they will stand like on the ground to take a bath. Large keel, 30% of the bird's weight. I mean, that's a lot of muscle, flight muscles for those guys. E-curve bill, this is our lucifer here. And you do see them in southeastern Arizona. Do you guys ever get any lucifers? Not that often. I usually see them in the Huachuca Mountains Mary Jo, and just south of the Huachucas, usually has one every year in southeastern Arizona. Swordbill, my friend Aaron Leonard actually took these, and this bird has the longest bill of any bird in the world, 4-inch bill, and he actually has to sleep with his head up and kind of pointing his head up. And as compared to our little calliope with the 1/2-inch bill here. These guys are very specialized, so if things become warmer and some of the plants don't do as well, you know, with the heat and the lack of moisture, this bird will probably suffer just because it's very, a lot of our birds, our hummingbirds are very, how do you say it? Yes, exactly. This guy's a specialist, so he will. The species that are specialists will be the first to go, and unfortunately, hopefully, you know, other than habitat destruction, you know, they make it. Torpor, just what I was talking about. This bird, this is Ananas right here, and he's in a torpor. Sometimes they put the bill up like that when they're in a torpor. Okay, so hummingbirds have a metabolism 12 times that of a pigeon, 25 times that of a chicken, and 50 times that of a human. If we had the same type of metabolism as a hummingbird, we wouldn't be able to eat enough food to stay alive. I mean, it would be a lot of food. I talked about torpor, lowering the body temperature, metabolism. They're eating often, about every 7-12 minutes. If they've got enough food, if they've, you know, gathered enough calories in the day, they don't have to go into torpor. One of the things that I like, and I'll put this in my hummingbird book, is that if you watch hummingbirds, you see a lot of interesting behavior. And they like to preen, they like to sing, take baths, this little female black chin here, if you have any kind of water, or if you're out in your yard and you hose the vegetation, they'll come and take a bath on the leaves, or if you have a sprinkler or something, they'll actually, I'm out in the yard watering some of my plants, they'll come and take a bath. One of the things that the broadbills do, this guy's sunning, and some birds do it, and our broadbills, well actually we have, they'll usually sit right out in, it'll be 117 degrees, and they're sitting out in the sun sunning. And, you know, they could be absorbing vitamin D. They could be ridding their feathers of ectoparasites. Let's see, what is the other? But these guys, a lot of times, I think with these guys, if they're sitting out and it's really, really hot, or they could be regulating their body temperature. Roadrunners do that. They have that black spot on their back, and they move their feathers, and they face the sun in the morning, and they warm up. Well, hummingbirds don't have that, but they do sit out and warm up. With the broadbills, like in our hummingbird exhibit, they did it all the time, but they usually did it when it was real hot. So it probably was they were absorbing vitamin D, or maybe they were, you know, trying to rid themselves of parasites. We actually had some BGJs that used to sun, and I had a circular, and it had different tropical birds, and we would get a call that a BGJ had died, and we knew what was going on, because the BGJs would get down on the ground, and they would spread their wings, and they would twist their head, and they were sunning, and people, you know, it looked horrible. And so we always went down there to see, and as soon as they heard us or we said anything, they'd pop up, you know, like, I wasn't doing anything. So, you know, if you're a bird out in the wild and you're down on the ground, you're probably not going to last too long. You know, if you're at the desert museum and an enclosure, you're probably okay. Hummingbirds don't usually get down on the ground to do that, but some other birds, you know, especially roadrunners, BGJ, some. This is a guy, this is a broadbill, he's sunning. A lot of times they'll spread his tail way, way out, and they'll kind of twist the head or twist the neck. Birds have what's called a preening gland at the base of the tail, and it secretes waxes and oils. And, you know, they need to weatherproof the feathers, waterproof them, and so they do spend a lot of time preening. And that's what this, these are all taken in the hummingbird exhibit. That's what this Lucifer is doing. So they, put their bill down there, and they take these waxes and oils, and they rub them on their feathers. Love to take baths. If you've got I actually saw a hummingbird in Mexico, a violet crown, dive into the water and take a bath, which is pretty cool. And even when I was in Ecuador, I didn't see that, but they will get down in the water, like the rufous here, and this looks like a young costas right here, our bully, the rufus, and here's our black-chin. So they're all kind of down. So if you have a little waterfall, they definitely will take a bath. In the hummingbird exhibit, we would go in there twice a day, and we would count the birds. So if there was a bird in trouble, we would know. We would find that bird. And I didn't like it when they were molting because they get very shy, and it's like they know they're not very attractive. And this guy, you can see right here, he's got some pin feathers coming out. So usually, they'll do the flight feathers, and they'll do a little bit at a time. They're not going to lose all their flight feathers or be flightless like maybe some waterfowl do. But because they still have to fly, they have to be able to get at the flowers. And so when they're molting, they are very, very shy. This little guy right here, you can see the little pin feathers. So when they take the foot, they're tearing away that covering of the new feather, and they're pulling it off. And by the time that they're done, this is what they look like. And usually molting and migration takes a lot of energy, so they usually don't molt until they're on their wintering grounds. And Annas are kind of a little bit different because they will, down in southern Arizona, they will start nesting. Most birds don't nest in the winter, but these guys will start nesting in October, November, and go through the winter. And they seem to do okay, even though it gets pretty cold. But then they'll usually molt after that. But a lot of birds, on their wintering grounds, when they're laying on the beach, they're down in Mexico, they're actually molting, a lot of them, and they're putting on their new feathers. So by the time they come back up to the U.S., they've grown in all their feathers, and they're very fast, and they also look beautiful, like this guy up here, and they can be ready for the breeding. Males will start, one of the studies that I did was I would follow the young males from the nest, and usually in the nest they would have a little bit of coloring, because you can see this guy right here, he's just got a little bit, he's even got some pollen right there on the bill. But they just kind of pucker up and lean forward, and it's just horrible. The song is just scratchy, and you hear it, like if I'm out hiking or something, I hear it, I go, oh, that's a young male, practicing. But they practice and practice and practice. And by the time they've gotten all of their adult plumage in, which can be under a year, and these guys can also breed in a year, they usually have a very well-developed song. And remember, like I said, those males are going to have a song, or they're either going to have a wing buzz to defend their territories or attract the females in their dives. Okay, migration. We don't know a whole lot about migration with hummingbirds. It's kind of hard to put, radio telemetry on them, although I think they've tried different things. But, most hummingbirds, especially the ruby throat, is going to go, in the eastern, northern U.S. here, is going to go across the Gulf of Mexico. But one of the things that researchers have noticed is that they're not all going across the Gulf. And some of them, when I was down in Rockport every year, I would always go out on a boat ride, and, we'd go out to these islands to see all the birds. And I always saw the hummingbirds going over the Gulf, and they were fairly low, just barely above the top of the water. And a lot of people didn't see it. I would get all excited and they'd go, where? It's like, no, you got to look down. It's way down there. So what they found out is not all the hummingbirds are going across there. They're hugging the coast and going down into Mexico and regions down, which makes sense. It's going to take them longer. And then plus, look at the hurricanes that we've had, just these horrible hurricanes. I think birds can determine, the weather a lot better than we can. But if you're out in the Gulf and you've got to have enough, fat, how many stories have you read about ships and these birds, that fall down on the ships? They're exhausted from the migration. They definitely have to have the fat store to be able to get across. But Paul Johnsgaard in Hummingbirds in North America figured out what it would take for a ruby throat to get across the Gulf if they were going to go, across the Gulf down into the Yucatan Peninsula or wherever they're going. I mean, 2 grams of fat will get them, 600 miles or more, and that'll get them across the Gulf of Mexico. And 1 gram of fat equals 9 calories. So they're doing it with 18 calories. I mean, can you imagine that, going, more than 600 miles? I mean, it's just, they're so efficient that it's just amazing. I had a man come out and tell me that National Geographic wrote an article about hummingbirds migrating on the back of geese. And I said, do you have the articles? No, it's true. That's what they said, that they can't do it themselves and they're riding on the back of geese. And I said, well, if you show me the article, and I mean, he was adamant about it. No, they can't do it. They're too small. Yes, they can. I mean, that's proof right there. But anyway, I thought that here's a rufous on the back of a vulture migrating. So, the males start watching. This is actually, green violet ear. These are cool. I saw these down in Costa Rica and also Ecuador. These guys are leckers, meaning that, they line up and, most colorful and beautiful and display is the one that gets the female. This was actually in our hummingbird exhibit, and these are calliopes. And you can see if you've got a smaller species of hummingbird, the female is bigger. And why would the female be bigger than the male for the smaller species? Tougher, yeah. Nesting. She's got to take care of those babies. Those males aren't going to do anything but breed with her. So she's got to be able to build a nest, lay the eggs, and then take care of those young and raise them. So this is a good example of the size here. But what these guys do, I mean, there's just a fine line between breeding and fight and hatred and everything with these guys. The males will start, this little male, he's got his gorget sticking out, and calliope, that means star, the little gorget there. Will display to her, he'll do a horizontal shuttle. These guys will go up and come down, but until she's ready to breed, she's not going to copulate with her. And so they do a lot of displaying, and they never know when the females are going to be receptive, and they're always displaying. These were here. This is a good one here. She's just sitting there like, yeah. What else do you have? And he's just like back and forth. And you see how his feathers are sticking out right there. Can everyone see? Okay. Here he is back up here, and this is in the hummingbird exhibit. And I was just in the right place at the right time. A lot of times they'll open their bill and make a little whiny noise too. Now these aren't calliopes; these are costas, and they're copulating, and it just all takes like a second, and it's done and it's over with. And he'll breed with as many females as he can breed with. Are these birds breeding? These are Annas. No, he's just being a jerk. And these were some of the docents at the Desert Museum, and this was that took this picture, was in their backyard, and he just actually knocked her to the ground, and she finally did get up and got away. But the males are just so aggressive, very, very aggressive. Just some more pictures of our little calliope. I just love this guy. This guy was so cool. 2.3 grams. You know what? When they get nesty and they want to build a nest, they'll start hovering around and things. You can put out things like if you've got a cat or dog, put out some of the hair. They also use the plant down under leaves. They'll use that, and then they'll use spider webbing to hold it all together. But in our hummingbird exhibit, they were always looking for sweaters. This little girl wanted some of his arm hair. And, I mean, they're just, and this red hair, they absolutely loved red hair. And photographers would come in, and they'd want to sit on their tripod, like the guy who's going to stand there for 3 weeks, while they nested. So people were really usually pretty good about it. But the female will start acting nesty. She'll start hovering around, picking at things. And it depends on how experienced she is, it will depend on how long it will take. And we've had very experienced females that can build a nest in 2 days, 3 days, something like that. We had a female once that it was like going on the second week, and this nest just got worse and worse and worse. And I thought, I just need to go over there and tear it down, but, I won't. And a storm came along and blew it down, and then she just went somewhere and nested somewhere. So I don't know why they're so site-specific sometimes. But the ones that are inexperienced will take a little bit longer, and sometimes don't always pick a good site to build their nest. But you can see they'll decorate it with lichens and bark, hold it all together with spider webbing. Look at this female right here. This is a friend of mine down in Venezuela, and he's got some captive hummingbirds, and they nest and do a really good job. They lay 2 bean-sized eggs, and the eggs are laid 48 hours apart, and she starts incubating with the laying of the first egg. Like quail, she'll, gamble quail, any kind of quail, will lay a clutch of eggs, and then she'll start incubating, so they all hatch at the same time, and they can go and follow her. Hummingbirds aren't that way. They'll just start incubating with the laying of the first egg. Here you can see a female right here. She's bringing some nesting material, and they usually bring it in their bill, not in their feet, because their feet aren't real functional for holding things. Although I have a good story in a few minutes, I'll tell you. Dad is promiscuous, so he's going to breed with as many females as he can. That's why he's just so beautiful. He doesn't have to have the camouflage that the female has. Usually with our hummers, it's spring or summer. Annas are kind of the exception to that. They'll use all kinds of plant down, animal hair. We used to take sweaters and shred them and put the yarn out, and they would use some of the yarn. Let's see. Altricial. If you have a quail and they hatch, they're precocial, and they can get up and just their eyes are open and they'll run, right after mom and dad. These guys are altricial, and it takes about 8 or 10 days for the eyes to open and for them to regulate the body temperature. So she's brooding at that point once the eggs have been hatched, and she's keeping them warm. Just a few nests, and a lot of times they'll pick nests like in the crotch of a tree like this, and broadbills a lot of times. This is actually our calliope, only calliope that ever bred in captivity. And she had a little bark, and they'll decorate. A lot of times broadbills will have these nests that have a lot of hanging things, from the nest, and then the spider web. And you have to be real careful with the spider webs because they can get caught in the spider webs. We had some broadbills, a female and a male fledgling, and the males are real aggressive. And one of the males ran the females into a spider web, and he did it on purpose. And if we hadn't been there, to rescue her, she would have died because she couldn't fly. She had all the silk on her wings, so he's just being a little jerk. Let me tell you my story before I get any further. Usually when the female, when she's got the nest built or almost got the nest built, then she's ready to copulate. And once she lays the eggs, she's not interested, and the males just kind of don't know when to give up at that point. So there was this female, and she was incubating. She had bred and laid her eggs, and there was this male that came up to her nest, and let me go back where there's a female in a nest. Okay, so the male just came up, and he goes, right there in front of her face, so she'd jump off and chase him and get back on her nest, and here he came again. I was down there watching, and he did this about 3 or 4 times, and I thought, boy, she's going to get real sick of this. So on about the 4th or 5th time, when she jumped up, she grabbed him by the head, the feathers on his head, and they both went down to the ground. And she just held him to the ground while he just screamed and flopped around. And she let him go, and he didn't come back to bother her. So those are the little stories I'm going to write in my book. And, he learned his lesson the hard way. She's like, buddy, I don't need this at all. So when they're little, like these guys up here, they're less than a week old. She's going to brood a lot. There's a few, along the back, the track right there. She has they have a few little feathers. But after about 7-8 days, then they're going to start growing in more feathers, and the eyes are going to open. What she does is when she, and this is our calliope, when she approaches the nest, if they're sleeping and they don't hear her, she will gently tap them on the head. And usually that will solicit, the open bill and the begging response. And I saw him a lot of times, like this little guy looks like he's sleeping. She would just gently touch him, and then they would just, kind of pop up at that point. Most of the time, like this guy here, boy, he was waiting for her when she came up. And they were ready. He was ready to be fed. But as they get bigger, they fill the nest. And they usually don't fledge at the same time. And even though there's 48 hours between the two when the eggs hatch, that's usually a big difference in size. Usually by the time they're ready to fledge, they're about the same size. So she takes an extra effort to feed the little one to help it to catch up. When the eggs hatch, you can see, this is my friend in Venezuela that has the captive hummingbirds. You can see the little feathers here. And this species kind of looks like a broadbill. This egg hasn't hatched. She'll come and she'll throw the eggs out of the nest, and that's so it doesn't attract predators, because cactus wrens, cardinals will come and kill those babies if they know there's a nest. So it's real important that these guys camouflage it and hide it so that, the other birds, predatory birds, won't come in. This little guy just left the nest, and this is what they do. When they're in the nest, you know how baby birds will make a lot of noise when they're in the nest? Hummingbirds don't do that. And if the babies are making noise, they're probably sick or something's wrong. Their survival depends on them being quiet. But once they get out of the nest, they become what I call crybabies. They just sit there with their mouth, the bill open, and they just, cry. I've even seen females who didn't, have those young actually go and feed them. So it was like, I saw a female once, she was just incubating. There was a baby that had fledged and was begging, and she just got off the nest and went over and fed it. And it wasn't even her youngster, so she couldn't stand to listen, to the baby. Usually the bills are short. Their little tails are going to usually be short. And if there's two of them, they will usually stay fairly close together, and then as they get more experience, there'll be more distance. I was in Mexico once and watching some broadbills, and I was watching Mom. I didn't know where the babies were, and I watched her go and feed one. I saw, because I heard it begging, and then back over there was another one. So she's pretty busy taking care of those babies, and she doesn't get any help from the male. And you can see this little guy, he's starting to get some of his, you can see some of the color coming in. He's got a lot of pin feathers here. Short bill. That bill will get longer, very short. This is a youngster they fledge when they're about 3 weeks old, so he's probably about 4 weeks old. Just some picture of some fledglings. And this little guy cute. These guys are so cute. One of the things with captive hummingbirds is that you see things that hummingbirds are capable of, but you might not see it out in the wild. And hummingbirds don't do mutual preening like some birds do, especially pairs of birds, how they will mutually preen, and that kind of bonds them together. But this female came and she fed, and once she was done, she hopped over to the other side and she just started stroking him on the head, which is real unusual for hummingbirds to do. He was like, don't touch me. He was squirming, but it's pretty unusual for even mother hummingbirds to do that. Is it okay to feed hummers? Yep, it is. I got 8 feeders at my house. 1 part sugar to 4 parts water. You don't need any kind of coloring. There's also some things going around in the summer, especially where we live in Arizona, that you should dilute it. Don't dilute it. And it's 4-to-1. That's what they're getting. They're getting 25% sugar from flowers, and that's what you should give them. And I tell people if it's hot, and you think they need some water, put a feeder out with some water, but don't dilute your feeders. You just shouldn't do that because the flowers aren't changing, and you really shouldn't. Just keep it 4-to-1, exactly what they're getting in the wild. And a lot of times, and then if you have a sprinkler or you have a hose or something, you know, they'll also drink water off of leaves. You want to change it right now. My feeders I'm having to change every 2 to 3 days because I've got so many birds. And you know, be sure and use bleach water, 1 to 10, and clean that. I usually tell people do it at night, clean them real good, because they'll scold you in the morning if you took your feeders in and you haven't put them back out. Just photo credits. Juan Fernandez firecrown, a critically endangered hummingbird, and a little island, Juan Fernandez Island off of Cuba, or is it Chile? No, I think it's Chile. This is kind of cute. A lot of Native Americans, my dad was half Native American, and a lot of Native American tribes saw the hummingbird as being noble and very brave, very beautiful. And this is kind of a legend or lore from the Tohono O'odham and the Pima Indians. Otoham say that rain is blind and wind acts as his companion and guide. Once long ago, the people drove wind away and rain went with him. Everything dried up and all living things suffered in the heat. Hummingbird tied feathers to a stick as a wind indicator and flew away to the east and found wind living in a cave beside a stream. Wind and rain agreed to return if the desert people sang for them, so the people made wine from the fruit of the saguaro and sang the ceremonial songs, and rain returned to the desert. I think that's pretty cool. Well, it's been fantastic. I appreciate the Rebecca inviting me up and everyone helping me get everything together for this. And if you have any questions, I can do my best to answer them. If you go to Amazon.com, you can see the books. Even though this is Desert Life, it talks about all the deserts in the Southwest, and you have a lot of the animals. It's plants, animals, insects that we have down in the southern part. And then Desert Life is a real good activity book. Kids love it. It would be a great Christmas gift, and adults even like it too. Thank you.